Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Part 1. Humble Beginnings. Millard Fillmore's life commenced on January 7, 1800, in a modest log cabin nestled in the rural expanse of Cayuga County, New York, a region characterized by its rugged terrain and sparse population. Born to Nathaniel and Phoebe Fillmore, Millard was the second of 9 children in a family that grappled with the harsh realities of frontier life. Nathaniel Fillmore, a tenant farmer, toiled tirelessly to provide for his large family, yet financial stability remained elusive. The Fillmore family's existence was marked by relentless labor, with each member contributing to the daily struggle for sustenance and survival. In this environment, formal education was a luxury beyond reach. Young Millard's early years were devoid of structured schooling, as the demands of farm work took precedence. However, his innate curiosity and desire for knowledge were evident from a tender age. He would often borrow books from neighbors and read by the dim light of the fireplace after a day's labor. This self-directed learning laid the foundation for his intellectual development, fostering a resilience and determination that would define his character. At the age of 14, Millard was apprenticed to a cloth dresser, a common practice aimed at providing vocational skills to youth. The apprenticeship was grueling, involving long hours and menial tasks, yet it offered little in terms of intellectual stimulation. Dissatisfied with the prospects of a life confined to manual labor, Millard sought avenues to expand his horizons. His aspirations extended beyond the limitations imposed by his socioeconomic status, reflecting an early ambition to transcend his humble beginnings. The turning point in Millard's pursuit of education came when he enrolled in the New Hope Academy, a local institution that provided basic instruction. Despite his limited prior schooling, he excelled in his studies, demonstrating a remarkable aptitude for learning. It was here that he met Abigail Powers, a teacher at the academy, who recognized his potential and encouraged his academic endeavors. Their relationship, rooted in mutual respect and intellectual companionship, would later culminate in marriage, forming a partnership that profoundly influenced Millard's personal and professional life. Millard's journey from an uneducated farm boy to a learned individual was neither linear nor easy. He faced numerous obstacles, including financial constraints and societal expectations that often relegated individuals of his background to a life of labor. Yet, his unwavering commitment to self-improvement propelled him forward. He took on various jobs to fund his education, including teaching at local schools, which not only provided income but also reinforced his belief in the transformative power of knowledge. The early 19th century was a period of significant change in America, with the frontier expanding and new opportunities emerging. However, these opportunities were often inaccessible to those without means or education. Millard's determination to educate himself was a testament to his belief in the American ideal that hard work and perseverance could overcome the barriers of birth and circumstance. His early experiences instilled in him a profound empathy for the underprivileged and a recognition of the importance of accessible education, themes that would later influence his political philosophy. In reflecting upon Millard Fillmore's humble beginnings, it becomes evident that his early life was a crucible in which his character was forged. The challenges he faced and the resilience he exhibited not only shaped his personal trajectory, but also informed his approach to leadership and governance. His story serves as a compelling narrative of self-made success, embodying the quintessential American journey from obscurity to prominence. Part 2. Path to Education and Law. Millard Fillmore's quest for education was a defining aspect of his early life, reflecting a deep-seated belief in the power of knowledge to transcend social and economic barriers. After his formative years of self-directed learning and intermittent formal education, Fillmore sought to further his intellectual and professional development. His experiences as a teacher provided both financial support and a platform to refine his communication skills, essential for his future endeavors. In 1819, Fillmore's determination led him to the office of Judge Walter Wood in Montville, New York, where he secured a clerkship. This position was pivotal, as it introduced him to the legal profession and provided a structured environment for his studies. Under Judge Wood's mentorship, Fillmore immersed himself in legal texts, developing a comprehensive understanding of the law. His rigorous self-study, combined with practical experience, culminated in his admission to the New York State Bar in 1823. With his legal credentials, Fillmore established a practice in East Aurora, New York, a small community where he quickly gained a reputation for integrity and diligence. His clientele primarily comprised farmers and small business owners, individuals who appreciated his straightforward approach and commitment to justice. Fillmore's legal practice not only provided financial stability, but also deepened his understanding of the challenges faced by ordinary citizens, informing his later political perspectives. During this period, Fillmore's personal life flourished as well. In 1826, he married Abigail Powers, his former teacher and intellectual confidant. Their partnership was characterized by mutual respect and shared values, with Abigail playing a significant role in Fillmore's personal and professional growth. The couple had 2 children, Millard Powers Fillmore and Mary Abigail Fillmore, and their family life was marked by a commitment to education and civic responsibility. Fillmore's success as a lawyer and his growing involvement in community affairs naturally led him toward politics. He became active in local issues, advocating for infrastructure improvements and educational initiatives. His ability to articulate the concerns of his constituents and propose practical solutions garnered him respect and recognition. This grassroots engagement laid the groundwork for his entry into the broader political arena. In 1828, Fillmore's political career formally began with his election to the New York State Assembly as a member of the Anti-Masonic Party. This party emerged in response to widespread suspicion of the Freemasons, a secretive fraternal organization perceived as wielding undue influence. Fillmore's alignment with the anti-Masonic movement reflected his commitment to transparency and opposition to elitism. During his tenure in the Assembly, he advocated for judicial reforms and the expansion of public education, issues that resonated with his constituents and showcased his legislative capabilities. Fillmore's legislative accomplishments and growing prominence within the Anti-Masonic Party led to his election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1832. Serving multiple terms, he became known for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to navigate complex legislative processes. His work on tariff legislation, particularly the Tariff of 1842, demonstrated his commitment to protecting American industries and promoting economic growth. Fillmore's tenure in Congress solidified his reputation as a pragmatic and effective lawmaker, setting the stage for his future ascent to national leadership. Throughout these formative years, Fillmore's journey from a self-taught student to a respected lawyer and legislator exemplified the transformative power of education and perseverance. His experiences in the legal field and his early political engagements provided him with a nuanced understanding of governance and the intricacies of law, equipping him with the skills necessary to navigate the complex political landscape of his time. Part 3. Political Beginnings. Millard Fillmore's early political career began during a time of dynamic changes in the American political system, marked by the rise of populist movements and the collapse of traditional party structures. Fillmore's entry into politics was facilitated by his alignment with the Anti-Masonic Party, a populist faction formed in the late 1820s to challenge the perceived undue influence of the Freemasons. The anti-Masonic movement resonated with rural and working-class Americans who sought transparency in government and viewed secret societies as a threat to democracy. Fillmore, hailing from humble beginnings and deeply attuned to the concerns of ordinary citizens, found the party's principles aligned with his own values. Elected to the New York State Assembly in 1828, Fillmore quickly established himself as a capable legislator with a strong commitment to reform. His tenure in the Assembly was marked by advocacy for judicial reforms, the expansion of public education, and efforts to make government more accessible and accountable to the people. He gained a reputation for his methodical approach to governance and his ability to navigate contentious issues without alienating his peers. This pragmatism would become a hallmark of his political style, distinguishing him in a highly polarized era. As the Anti-Masonic Party began to wane in the early 1830s, Fillmore transitioned to the Whig Party, a newly formed coalition that united diverse groups under a platform of economic modernization and federal support for infrastructure development. The Whigs sought to counter the populist policies of Andrew Jackson's Democratic Party, advocating for a more active role of the federal government in shaping the nation's economic future. Fillmore's background as a self-made man and his support for protective tariffs and internal improvements made him a natural fit for the Whigs. His move to the party reflected both his evolving political philosophy and his strategic understanding of the shifting electoral landscape. In 1832, Fillmore was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a Whig, marking the beginning of his national political career. His time in Congress was defined by his work on economic issues, particularly his support for protective tariffs designed to shield American manufacturers from foreign competition. Fillmore believed that a robust industrial base was essential for the country's economic independence and long-term prosperity. His advocacy for these policies earned him the support of Northern manufacturers and workers, cementing his reputation as a champion of economic development. Fillmore's legislative achievements during this period included his role in drafting the Tariff of 1842, a landmark piece of legislation that raised duties on imported goods to protect domestic industries. The tariff not only stabilized government revenues, but also fostered economic growth, particularly in northern states. Despite facing opposition from free trade advocates and Southern agricultural interests, Fillmore's work on the tariff demonstrated his ability to craft compromise solutions that balanced competing regional and economic priorities. While economic policy was a central focus of his congressional career, Fillmore also took a keen interest in social issues, particularly education. He was an early proponent of public education as a means of empowering citizens and promoting social mobility. His efforts to secure federal funding for educational initiatives reflected his belief that knowledge was a vital tool for individual and national progress. This commitment to education was deeply rooted in his own experiences of overcoming the barriers of poverty through learning, making it a recurring theme throughout his life. As Fillmore's profile rose, so did his influence within the Whig Party. He emerged as a key figure in the party's northern wing, advocating for policies that balanced economic development with the preservation of national unity. However, his measured and pragmatic approach sometimes placed him at odds with more ideologically driven colleagues, a dynamic that foreshadowed the challenges he would face later in his career. Despite these tensions, Fillmore remained steadfast in his commitment to moderation and compromise, qualities that endeared him to constituents, but also made him a target of criticism from both extremes of the political spectrum. By the early 1840s, Fillmore had become a seasoned and respected legislator, well-versed in the complexities of governance and deeply attuned to the needs of his constituents. His work in Congress not only solidified his reputation as a practical and effective lawmaker, but also laid the groundwork for his eventual rise to national prominence. As the political landscape continued to evolve, Fillmore's ability to adapt and navigate the shifting currents of American politics would prove essential in shaping his future trajectory. Part 4. Rising through the ranks. Millard Fillmore's rise to prominence during the 1830s and 1840s was marked by his dedication to legislative excellence and his ability to balance competing interests in an increasingly fragmented political landscape. His work in Congress during this time established him as a leading figure in the Whig Party, where he gained recognition for his steady, pragmatic approach to governance. While other politicians captured headlines with fiery speeches and polarizing rhetoric, Fillmore built his reputation on hard work, careful deliberation, and results. It was a style that appealed to his constituents and set him apart in the tumultuous world of 19th-century American politics. A defining moment in Fillmore's congressional career came with his role in shaping the Tariff of 1842, a key piece of legislation aimed at stabilizing the nation's economy and protecting American industries. The tariff raised duties on imported goods, fostering domestic production and providing much-needed revenue for the federal government. This legislation was particularly popular in Fillmore's home state of New York, where manufacturers and workers alike benefited from the economic boost it provided. While the tariff faced significant opposition from Southern states and free trade advocates, Fillmore's efforts to navigate the legislative process and secure its passage showcased his political acumen and commitment to economic development. Fillmore's focus on economic policy extended beyond tariffs. He was a vocal advocate for federal investment in infrastructure projects, including the construction of canals, roads, and railroads. These improvements not only facilitated commerce and communication, but also connected remote regions of the country, fostering a sense of national unity. Fillmore viewed these projects as essential for ensuring America's growth and competitiveness in an increasingly interconnected world. His support for these initiatives earned him the admiration of Northern industrialists and farmers, who saw him as a champion of progress. In addition to his economic agenda, Fillmore took a keen interest in issues of public education and judicial reform. He believed that an educated citizenry was vital for the success of democracy and worked to expand access to schooling. His efforts to improve the quality and accessibility of education were deeply personal, reflecting his own struggles to overcome a lack of formal schooling in his youth. Fillmore also supported reforms to streamline the legal system and ensure that justice was accessible to all citizens, regardless of their economic status. These positions resonated with voters, further solidifying his reputation as a practical and compassionate leader. As Fillmore's stature within the Whig Party grew, so did his influence on national politics. By the early 1840s, he had become a trusted advisor to party leaders and a key figure in shaping the Whigs' legislative priorities. His ability to bridge divides between different factions within the party was particularly valuable during this period of political realignment. While the Whigs were united in their opposition to Andrew Jackson and the Democrats, they were often divided on issues such as slavery, tariffs, and the role of the federal government. Fillmore's talent for compromise and consensus building helped to hold the party together during these challenging years. Fillmore's growing prominence did not come without challenges. His moderate stance on contentious issues often drew criticism from more ideologically driven members of the Whig Party. While some viewed his pragmatism as a strength, others accused him of lacking the bold vision needed to address the nation's most pressing problems. Despite these critiques, Fillmore remained steadfast in his belief that practical solutions and incremental progress were the keys to effective governance. This philosophy would later define his presidency, as he sought to navigate the deepening divisions that threatened to tear the country apart. By the mid-1840s, Fillmore was widely regarded as one of the most effective and respected members of the Whig Party. His work in Congress had demonstrated his ability to tackle complex policy issues and deliver tangible results for his constituents. However, his ambitions extended beyond the legislative branch. As the political landscape continued to shift, Fillmore began to set his sights on higher office, eager to bring his vision of pragmatic governance to a broader stage. This ambition, coupled with his proven track record of leadership, would soon propel him to the national spotlight, laying the foundation for his eventual rise to the vice presidency and beyond. Part 5. The Path to Vice Presidency. Millard Fillmore's rise to the vice presidency was a culmination of years of steady political growth, strategic alliances, and a reputation for reliability within the Whig Party. By the late 1840s, the Whigs were in search of a balanced ticket for the 1848 presidential election, a critical moment for the party as it sought to consolidate power amid deepening sectional tensions. The selection process for the vice presidential nominee was not only a reflection of Fillmore's political achievements, but also of his geographical and ideological appeal, which made him an attractive choice for party leaders aiming to unite their diverse coalition. The Whig Party faced significant challenges in the lead-up to the 1848 election. The issue of slavery was increasingly fracturing the nation, with Northern and Southern Whigs holding divergent views on its expansion into newly acquired territories. The Mexican-American War had brought vast new lands under U.S. control, reigniting debates over the balance of power between free and slave states. At the same time, the Whigs sought to distinguish themselves from the Democrats, who were associated with the war and its divisive aftermath. The party's strategy revolved around selecting candidates who could appeal to a broad cross-section of the electorate, bridging regional and ideological divides. Fillmore, with his roots in New York, a critical swing state, emerged as an ideal vice presidential candidate. His moderate stance on slavery and his commitment to economic development resonated with Northern voters, while his measured rhetoric and dedication to compromise made him palatable to Southern factions of the party. Furthermore, his reputation as a diligent and experienced legislator lent credibility to the Whig ticket, balancing the charisma and military fame of the party's presidential nominee, Zachary Taylor. Taylor, a Southern slaveholder and war hero, appealed to voters seeking stability and national unity, while Fillmore's presence on the ticket helped to reassure Northern Whigs who were wary of Taylor's views on slavery. Fillmore's selection as the Whig vice presidential nominee was not without controversy. While he was widely respected within the party, some Whigs questioned whether his low-key style and lack of national fame would energize voters. Others were concerned about his alignment with the more moderate wing of the party, fearing that it might alienate Southern supporters. Despite these reservations, Fillmore's nomination was ultimately seen as a strategic move to secure the party's electoral prospects in key battleground states. His ability to represent both Northern industrial interests and the Whigs' broader commitment to national unity made him an indispensable part of the ticket. The 1848 campaign was marked by a focus on broad, unifying themes, rather than the divisive issue of slavery. Taylor and Fillmore emphasized their commitment to preserving the Union, promoting economic growth, and maintaining peace in the aftermath of the Mexican-American War. This strategy proved effective, as the Whigs were able to attract voters from across the political spectrum. Taylor's military record and Fillmore's legislative expertise created a sense of balance and competence that resonated with many Americans. The ticket ultimately triumphed, with Taylor and Fillmore securing a decisive victory over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. The win was a significant achievement for the Whigs, who had struggled to maintain cohesion in the face of growing sectional tensions. As vice president, Fillmore found himself in a complex and often frustrating position. The role was largely ceremonial at the time, offering limited opportunities for direct influence on policy. However, Fillmore approached the position with the same diligence and professionalism that had characterized his legislative career. He presided over the Senate with impartiality and fairness, earning the respect of both Whigs and Democrats. His ability to maintain decorum and facilitate debate was particularly valuable during a period of intense political polarization. These qualities would later prove crucial as he assumed the presidency under the most challenging of circumstances. The 1848 election and Fillmore's subsequent rise to the vice presidency marked a turning point in his career, elevating him to the national stage and positioning him as a central figure in the tumultuous politics of the early 1850s. His steady ascent from humble beginnings to one of the highest offices in the land reflected not only his personal determination, but also his ability to navigate the complex and shifting currents of American political life. Little did Fillmore know, however, that his tenure as vice president would soon take a dramatic turn, thrusting him into the presidency and into the heart of the nation's most pressing crises. Part 6. The Unexpected Presidency. Millard Fillmore's ascent to the presidency in 1850 was as sudden as it was unexpected. The death of President Zachary Taylor on July 9, 1850, after only 16 months in office, thrust Fillmore into the role of the 13th President of the United States. For Fillmore, who had served diligently as vice president but remained largely in Taylor's shadow, this transition marked a profound turning point in his political career. The challenges he faced as president were immense, as the nation stood on the brink of crisis, with sectional tensions over slavery threatening to tear it apart. Taylor's presidency had been dominated by debates over the future of slavery in the territories acquired during the Mexican-American War. As a Southerner and a slaveholder, Taylor had initially been expected to align with pro-slavery interests. However, his surprising opposition to the extension of slavery into these territories alienated many Southern leaders and intensified the political divide. When Taylor died unexpectedly from an illness, Fillmore inherited a nation embroiled in discord, with little consensus on how to address the contentious issue of slavery. The fragile union appeared to be unraveling, and the new president faced enormous pressure to restore stability. Upon assuming the presidency, Fillmore immediately signaled a shift in policy by aligning himself with the pro-compromise faction in Congress. One of his first actions was to dismiss Taylor's entire cabinet, replacing them with individuals who supported the Compromise of 1850, a series of legislative measures designed to address the sectional disputes over slavery. This decisive move underscored Fillmore's determination to chart his own course as president and to prioritize the preservation of the Union above all else. His support for the compromise reflected his belief in the power of negotiation and moderation to resolve even the most divisive issues. The Compromise of 1850, orchestrated by Senator Henry Clay and supported by other prominent lawmakers like Daniel Webster and Stephen A. Douglas, sought to address the growing tensions between free and slave states. Its key provisions included the admission of California as a free state, the establishment of territorial governments in Utah and New Mexico with the question of slavery left to popular sovereignty, the abolition of the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and the enactment of a stricter fugitive slave law. Fillmore's endorsement of the compromise and his willingness to sign these measures into law highlighted his pragmatic approach to governance and his desire to avert a potential civil war. Despite Fillmore's intentions, the Compromise of 1850 proved to be both a short-term solution and a source of long-term contention. While it temporarily eased tensions by addressing immediate grievances, the measures deepened divisions within the nation. The fugitive slave law, in particular, sparked widespread outrage in the North, where many viewed it as an egregious concession to Southern slaveholders. Fillmore's decision to enforce the law rigorously, despite its unpopularity in his home region, underscored his commitment to upholding the Constitution and maintaining national unity. However, this stance alienated many Northern Whigs and further fractured the party, which was already struggling to reconcile its diverse factions. As president, Fillmore also turned his attention to foreign affairs, where he pursued a cautious and pragmatic approach. He sought to strengthen America's commercial ties with other nations, particularly in Asia, and worked to expand trade opportunities. His administration's most notable achievement in this area was the dispatch of Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan, an effort that would eventually lead to the opening of Japanese ports to American trade. While Fillmore's foreign policy initiatives were relatively modest, they reflected his broader commitment to stability and economic growth, both at home and abroad. Fillmore's unexpected presidency was a study in contrasts. On the one hand, his steady and pragmatic leadership helped to navigate the nation through a period of significant turmoil, preventing an immediate descent into conflict. On the other hand, his decisions, particularly his enforcement of the fugitive slave law, deepened the divisions that would ultimately culminate in the Civil War. Fillmore's presidency was a reflection of the challenges and contradictions of his time, as he sought to balance competing interests and maintain the fragile Union. Though often overshadowed by his more charismatic contemporaries, Fillmore's presidency marked a critical juncture in American history. His actions as president laid the groundwork for the intense debates and conflicts that would define the following decade, highlighting both the possibilities and limitations of compromise in the face of deep-seated divisions. In many ways, Fillmore's unexpected rise to the presidency and the challenges he faced encapsulated the broader struggles of a nation grappling with its identity and future. Part 7. Navigating the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 became the defining moment of Millard Fillmore's presidency, both shaping his legacy and reflecting the complex dynamics of a divided nation. At its core, the compromise aimed to address the growing sectional tensions over the expansion of slavery, which had intensified following the Mexican-American War. Fillmore's decision to embrace and champion this legislative package demonstrated his commitment to preserving the Union, even at the cost of alienating factions within his own party and region. His approach, though pragmatic, revealed the profound challenges of governing a country on the brink of fragmentation. The legislative package consisted of 5 bills, each designed to placate opposing interests within the North and South. California was admitted to the Union as a free state, a victory for abolitionists. However, to appease the South, the territories of New Mexico and Utah were organized with the question of slavery to be decided by popular sovereignty, effectively allowing settlers to determine whether these areas would permit slavery. The abolition of the slave trade in Washington, D.C., addressed Northern concerns about the capital's symbolic association with the institution of slavery. Meanwhile, the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act strengthened Southern support by requiring Northern states to assist in the capture and return of escaped slaves, a provision that would spark intense controversy. Fillmore's role in securing the passage of the compromise cannot be overstated. When he assumed the presidency, the measures faced significant opposition in Congress, with debates often devolving into heated arguments. Fillmore worked closely with key legislators, using his authority to advocate for the package as a necessary step to maintain national unity. His willingness to endorse the compromise and sign each bill into law reflected his belief that the measures offered the best chance to avoid disunion and potential civil war. However, his decision to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act would become one of the most polarizing aspects of his presidency. The Fugitive Slave Act mandated that escaped slaves be returned to their owners and imposed penalties on individuals who aided fugitives. For many in the North, the law was a moral affront, compelling them to participate in a system they abhorred. Resistance to the act took many forms, from public protests and legal challenges to the establishment of the Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses and routes used to help enslaved people escape to freedom. Fillmore, however, viewed the law as a constitutional obligation and a cornerstone of the compromise. He instructed federal officials to enforce it strictly, believing that upholding the law was essential to preserving the integrity of the Union. While Fillmore's stance earned him praise from Southern leaders, it alienated a significant portion of the Northern electorate, including many within his own Whig party. Abolitionists denounced him as a defender of slavery, while moderate Northerners grew increasingly disillusioned with his administration. The growing backlash highlighted the deepening rift within the Whig Party, which struggled to reconcile its Northern and Southern factions. Fillmore's efforts to bridge these divides ultimately fell short, as the party began to fracture under the weight of its internal contradictions. Despite these challenges, Fillmore believed that the Compromise of 1850 represented a necessary, if imperfect, solution to the nation's problems. He argued that the measures provided a temporary reprieve from sectional conflict, giving the country time to address its deeper issues. In private correspondence, Fillmore expressed hope that cooler heads would prevail and that the compromises would pave the way for a more lasting resolution. However, the events of the following decade would prove otherwise, as tensions over slavery continued to escalate, culminating in the Civil War. Fillmore's navigation of the Compromise of 1850 remains one of the most contentious aspects of his presidency. Supporters view his actions as a sincere effort to prevent disunion during a time of immense turmoil, while critics argue that his enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act perpetuated injustice and deepened sectional divides. Regardless of perspective, Fillmore's handling of the compromise reflected the complexities of leadership in a nation grappling with its identity and future. His presidency underscored the limits of compromise in addressing the moral and political challenges posed by slavery, setting the stage for the intense conflicts that lay ahead. Part 8: Foreign Policy and Expanding Horizons. While domestic challenges dominated Millard Fillmore's presidency, his administration also pursued a pragmatic approach to foreign policy. Aware of America's growing position on the global stage, Fillmore sought to strengthen the nation's economic ties and expand its influence through diplomacy and trade. Unlike the aggressive territorial expansionism associated with earlier presidencies, Fillmore's foreign policy was characterized by caution and strategic engagement, reflecting his belief in peaceful growth rather than conquest. His efforts, though often overshadowed by domestic controversies, laid important groundwork for America's future as an emerging global power. One of Fillmore's most notable foreign policy initiatives was his administration's effort to open trade relations with Japan, a country that had maintained a policy of isolation for centuries. In 1852, Fillmore authorized the dispatch of Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan, tasking him with negotiating a treaty to establish trade and diplomatic relations between the two nations. Perry's expedition, though completed under Fillmore's successor, Franklin Pierce, was a direct result of Fillmore's vision for expanding American commerce in Asia. This initiative marked the beginning of a transformative era in U.S.-Japan relations and underscored Fillmore's commitment to fostering economic opportunities through diplomacy. In addition to the mission to Japan, Fillmore's administration also focused on strengthening ties with Central and South America. He sought to promote trade and stability in the region, recognizing its strategic importance to the United States. Fillmore supported efforts to secure transit routes across Central America, particularly in Nicaragua and Panama, which were seen as vital for connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. These initiatives reflected his broader vision of enhancing America's commercial and geopolitical interests without resorting to military intervention or territorial acquisition. Fillmore's approach to European powers was similarly grounded in diplomacy and mutual respect. During his presidency, tensions arose with Great Britain over fishing rights in the North Atlantic, a long-standing issue between the two nations. Fillmore worked to resolve these disputes through negotiation, avoiding potential conflict and preserving the amicable relations established during previous administrations. His handling of these matters demonstrated his commitment to maintaining peace while safeguarding American economic interests. Despite his measured foreign policy, Fillmore faced criticism from expansionists within his own party who favored a more aggressive approach. Many Whigs and Democrats supported the idea of acquiring Cuba from Spain, viewing the island as a valuable addition to American territory. While some argued that Cuba's strategic location and economic potential made it a natural target for expansion, Fillmore was reluctant to pursue annexation, fearing that such a move would inflame sectional tensions over slavery. His decision to refrain from pursuing the acquisition of Cuba reflected his broader reluctance to engage in actions that could destabilize the fragile Union. Fillmore's administration also navigated complex relations with Mexico, which was still reeling from its defeat in the Mexican-American War. He worked to maintain peaceful relations with the Mexican government while addressing border disputes that arose in the wake of the war's territorial settlements. Fillmore's diplomatic approach helped to avoid further conflict, ensuring that the United States could focus on internal development rather than external entanglements. This emphasis on stability and cooperation exemplified his belief in diplomacy as a tool for advancing national interests. While Fillmore's foreign policy achievements were relatively modest compared to his domestic challenges, they reflected a clear and consistent vision. He sought to position the United States as a growing economic power while avoiding the aggressive expansionism that had defined earlier decades. His initiatives in Asia, Central America, and Europe demonstrated a forward-looking approach to international relations, emphasizing trade, stability, and peaceful engagement. These efforts, though often overlooked, contributed to America's gradual emergence as a global player, setting the stage for future advancements in trade and diplomacy. Fillmore's cautious and pragmatic approach to foreign affairs mirrored his leadership style in domestic matters. He prioritized long-term stability over short-term gains, a philosophy that often drew criticism from more ambitious or ideologically driven contemporaries. However, his foreign policy legacy, though understated, remains a testament to his belief in the power of diplomacy and the importance of fostering economic opportunities as a means of strengthening the nation. In this sense, Fillmore's presidency marked a subtle yet significant chapter in the evolution of America's role on the global stage. Part 9. The Decline of the Whig Party. Millard Fillmore's presidency coincided with the gradual unraveling of the Whig Party, a political force that had once held its own against the Democrats in shaping the nation's direction. By the time Fillmore assumed office, the Whigs were struggling to maintain cohesion amid growing sectional tensions over slavery. Fillmore's policies, particularly his support for the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act, played a significant role in deepening divisions within the party. His presidency became emblematic of the challenges the Whigs faced in adapting to a rapidly changing political landscape. The Whig Party had been founded in the early 1830s as a coalition united in opposition to Andrew Jackson's democratic policies. Its members included a diverse array of interests: Northern industrialists, Southern planters, and reform-minded moderates. Despite their differences, the Whigs found common ground in their support for economic modernization, a strong legislative branch, and a commitment to preserving the Union. However, as the 1840s progressed, the issue of slavery began to expose the fault lines within the party. Northern Whigs increasingly opposed the expansion of slavery, while Southern Whigs defended it as essential to their way of life. These conflicting positions made it increasingly difficult for the party to present a unified platform. Fillmore's presidency brought these tensions to the forefront. His support for the Compromise of 1850 was intended to bridge the divide between North and South by addressing the contentious issue of slavery in the territories. While the compromise temporarily averted secession and preserved the Union, its provisions alienated key constituencies within the Whig Party. Northern Whigs were particularly outraged by the Fugitive Slave Act, which they saw as a betrayal of their principles. Fillmore's strict enforcement of the law further eroded their support, leading many to question their allegiance to the party. At the same time, Southern Whigs viewed Fillmore's presidency with mixed feelings. While they appreciated his efforts to uphold the Fugitive Slave Act, they were wary of his moderate stance on other issues and his association with Northern industrial interests. This ambivalence prevented Fillmore from becoming a unifying figure within the party, leaving the Whigs increasingly fragmented as they approached the 1852 presidential election. Without a clear vision or a charismatic leader to rally around, the party struggled to maintain its relevance in a political landscape dominated by the slavery debate. The 1852 election marked a turning point for the Whigs and for Fillmore's political career. Despite his incumbency, Fillmore faced significant opposition within the party as he sought the Whig nomination for president. Many Northern Whigs, disillusioned by his enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act, rallied behind Senator William H. Seward and his more progressive vision. Meanwhile, Southern Whigs were divided over whether Fillmore represented their interests. This internal discord ultimately led to the nomination of General Winfield Scott, a military hero with limited political experience, as the Whig candidate. However, Scott's campaign failed to unify the party or resonate with voters, resulting in a decisive defeat to Democrat Franklin Pierce. Fillmore's defeat in the battle for the Whig nomination marked the end of his tenure as a major political force. Disillusioned by the growing influence of abolitionists within the northern wing of the party, he increasingly aligned himself with conservative factions that sought to preserve the Union through compromise. This shift reflected the broader realignment occurring within American politics as the Whig Party disintegrated and new political movements, such as the Republican Party, began to emerge. By the mid-1850s, the Whigs had largely ceased to function as a cohesive political entity, with their members divided along sectional lines and absorbed into other parties. The collapse of the Whig Party was both a reflection of and a contributor to the deepening divisions within the United States. Without a viable moderate force to bridge the gap between North and South, the nation became increasingly polarized, with tensions escalating toward the eventual outbreak of the Civil War. Fillmore's presidency and the internal conflicts of the Whig Party illustrated the challenges of navigating a nation in transition, where old political alliances were giving way to new and more extreme divisions. For Fillmore, the decline of the Whigs represented not only a personal setback but also a broader failure to achieve the consensus-driven politics he had championed. His efforts to preserve the Union through compromise and moderation, while well-intentioned, ultimately fell short in the face of irreconcilable differences over slavery. Yet, his presidency remains a poignant reminder of the complexities of leadership in a deeply divided nation, where even the best-intentioned efforts at unity can be overshadowed by the forces of history. Part 10: Fillmore's Post-Presidency and the Final Years. After the end of his presidency in 1853, Millard Fillmore withdrew from the political limelight, retreating to private life in Buffalo, New York. Despite his relatively low profile following his departure from the White House, Fillmore remained active in a variety of pursuits, including civic and charitable work. His post-presidency years reflected both a sense of personal retreat and a continued commitment to public service, albeit in a less prominent role. Fillmore's decision to step away from politics, however, did not mark an end to his influence on American political discourse. In the years following his presidency, Fillmore found himself increasingly at odds with the direction of the political landscape as new political movements began to take shape. With the collapse of the Whig Party, the Republican Party emerged as the dominant political force in the North, propelled by its anti-slavery platform and rapid growth in the 1850s. Fillmore, who had always viewed compromise as a means of preserving national unity, found himself out of step with the Republican Party's more aggressive stance against the expansion of slavery. Nevertheless, he remained politically active, aligning with moderate factions within the emerging Know Nothing movement, a party known for its anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic stance. In 1856, Fillmore ran for president again as the candidate of the American Party, better known as the Know Nothing Party. This party, which had gained significant traction in the North, sought to limit immigration and curtail the influence of Catholicism in American political life. While Fillmore's candidacy reflected his ongoing desire to remain a part of the political conversation, his bid was ultimately unsuccessful. The Know Nothing Party, despite its initial popularity, was unable to maintain a cohesive platform or appeal to a broad enough electorate, and Fillmore's campaign resulted in a distant third-place finish behind Democrat James Buchanan and Republican John C. Fremont. Fillmore's post-presidential years were not without controversy, as many viewed his alignment with the Know Nothing Party as a betrayal of the principles he had once championed. His support for nativism and anti-immigrant policies stood in stark contrast to the more inclusive, progressive ideals of his earlier political career. However, Fillmore himself remained steadfast in his belief that the Know Nothing Party represented the only viable alternative to the sectionalism and chaos that were consuming the nation. Despite his limited political success in the 1850s, Fillmore continued to play a role in civic affairs. He became deeply involved in educational and cultural causes, particularly through his work with the University of Buffalo, which he had helped to establish during his earlier political career. His contributions to the development of higher education in Buffalo were significant, and he remained a respected figure in local circles throughout the remainder of his life. He also took an active interest in the development of the Erie Canal, a key infrastructure project that had been instrumental in Buffalo's growth as a commercial center. Throughout the 1860s, Fillmore lived a relatively quiet life, though he maintained a steady correspondence with political figures and continued to reflect on the state of the nation. His views on the Civil War, which erupted in 1861, were complex and nuanced. Fillmore had always believed in the preservation of the Union, and he lamented the breakdown of the political compromises that had once held the country together. However, his position was often seen as too moderate by both sides of the conflict. He criticized the extremism of both abolitionists and pro-slavery factions, and his calls for reconciliation seemed increasingly out of touch as the war progressed. Millard Fillmore passed away on March 8, 1874, at the age of 74. His death marked the end of an era for a man who had served as president during one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. Although his legacy remains divisive, with critics and supporters offering starkly different assessments of his time in office, Fillmore's post-presidency years serve as a reminder of the complexities of political leadership during times of national crisis. His commitment to moderation and compromise, both during and after his presidency, underscores the challenges of navigating a deeply divided society, one whose divisions were only becoming more pronounced as the nation moved toward civil war. In retrospect, Fillmore's post-presidency was marked by a sense of withdrawal from the public eye, though his continued engagement in civic affairs and political movements demonstrated his desire to remain relevant in the national conversation. His life after the White House was one of reflection, adjustment, and continued service, and while he did not regain the prominence he once held, he remained an important figure in the history of mid-19th century America. Fillmore's final years provide insight into the shifting political currents of the time and the toll that national conflict can take on those who once sought to lead and unify a fractured nation. Part 11. The political landscape after Fillmore's presidency. Following Millard Fillmore's presidency, the political landscape of the United States underwent profound shifts that would dramatically reshape the nation's future. The political alignment of the 1850s saw the rapid rise of new parties and movements, largely in response to the sectional tensions over slavery that Fillmore had tried to manage during his term. As Fillmore exited the presidency, the Whig Party, the political vehicle that had brought him to office, was already in decline, and the Republican Party would soon rise to take its place. The collapse of the Whig Party in the early 1850s can be attributed to multiple factors, including its internal divisions over the issue of slavery. Fillmore's compromises, most notably his support for the Fugitive Slave Act as part of the 1850 Compromise, alienated many Northern Whigs who could not reconcile their personal beliefs against slavery with his policies. The Whig Party, which had prided itself on being a broad coalition of diverse interests, fractured over the slavery question, leaving a void that other political movements would fill. In the vacuum left by the Whigs, the Republican Party began to coalesce. Born out of the ashes of the Free Soil movement and anti-slavery factions of the Whigs and Democrats, the Republican Party rapidly gained support in the North. Its platform, which firmly opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories and supported economic modernization through internal improvements and a protective tariff, resonated strongly in the northern states. Fillmore, however, found himself increasingly marginalized as the political tides shifted. His own moderate stance on slavery and the Union, which had seemed pragmatic in the 1850s, became increasingly out of step with the radical new politics emerging from both the Republicans and the Democrats. Despite his diminished political influence, Fillmore did attempt to come back in 1856, running for president once again as the candidate of the American Party, also known as the Know-Nothing Party. This party, which rose in prominence during the mid-1850s, was rooted in nativism, anti-Catholic sentiment, and a fear of immigrant influence in American politics. Fillmore's alignment with this movement signaled his desperation to remain a political force, though his association with the party was controversial and ultimately unsuccessful. The Know-Nothing Party itself was short-lived, unable to form a coherent national platform, and Fillmore finished the election in third place, far behind the Democratic candidate James Buchanan and the Republican nominee John C. Fremont. The 1856 election marked a pivotal moment in American politics, with the Republican Party securing a firm foothold in the northern states and signaling the coming end of the Whig influence. Fillmore, as a figure caught between two increasingly polarized factions, found his attempts to return to the national stage increasingly irrelevant. His moderate stance on slavery and his belief in compromise, while once seen as a solution, now seemed weak and ineffective in the face of the growing animosity between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. The growing tensions over slavery were now shaping not just the political future, but also the cultural and social fabric of the nation. In the wake of the 1856 election, the Republican Party, bolstered by its new northern base, began to gain momentum. In 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, would mark the definitive end of the Whig Party's political dominance. Fillmore's political philosophy, one based on compromise and moderation, was increasingly seen as out of touch with the rising tide of abolitionism and the Republican Party's more radical platform. However, Fillmore's influence in post-presidential America was not entirely extinguished. While his political career had largely ended, he remained an important figure in his home state of New York and in certain civic and educational circles. He continued to advocate for the preservation of the Union, warning against the dangers of sectionalism, though his warnings were increasingly ignored as the country descended into civil war. The 1860s proved to be a difficult decade for Fillmore, as his political irrelevance became more apparent and the Union slipped into the throes of the Civil War. He had hoped for a peaceful resolution to the nation's divisions, but his vision of compromise had little support in the rapidly changing political world. As the Civil War began in 1861, Fillmore's position on the conflict remained moderate. He supported the Union, but he was critical of both the extremes of abolitionism and the secessionist movement in the South. His perspective, however, became increasingly rare in a nation divided by war. When Fillmore passed away in 1874, his death marked the end of a life that had spanned a crucial period in American history. Though his political career was marked by failure and compromise, his post-presidential years were spent as a devoted civic leader in Buffalo, where he continued to contribute to education and local development. Millard Fillmore's post-presidency, therefore, offers a complex legacy, one that reflects the intense struggle for national identity in the face of slavery, political realignment, and the onset of civil war. Ultimately, Fillmore's post-presidential years are a reminder that political figures often face difficulties in adapting to a changing world. His attempts to hold on to political relevance in a rapidly shifting environment, though unsuccessful, offer an insight into the challenges faced by many leaders during times of national upheaval. Part 12. The Political Landscape After Fillmore's Presidency. The political landscape of the United States in the years following Millard Fillmore's presidency was characterized by rapid change, uncertainty, and increasing sectional strife. Fillmore's administration, while often seen as a time of relative calm compared to the turmoil that would follow, was nonetheless a significant turning point in American history. His support for the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act, though intended to preserve the Union, inadvertently set the stage for greater political upheaval. As Fillmore exited the presidency, the nation was moving toward an era of partisan realignment that would reshape the nation's political structures. The collapse of the Whig Party, accelerated by the controversies of Fillmore's presidency, created a vacuum in American politics that would soon be filled by new political movements. The 1850s saw the emergence of the Republican Party, a coalition of anti-slavery activists, free soilers, Northern Whigs, and former Democrats who sought to oppose the spread of slavery into the new territories acquired after the Mexican-American War. This new party, which would dominate Northern politics, was rooted in a moral opposition to slavery and an economic platform that supported modernization, free labor, and internal improvements. The rise of the Republican Party was a direct consequence of the growing polarization between North and South, a division that Fillmore's moderate approach had failed to heal. The Republicans quickly became the leading opposition to the Democratic Party, particularly in the wake of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed for the possibility of slavery expanding into territories where it had previously been banned. The act provoked outrage in the North, and the Republicans gained significant support as they rallied around the cause of preventing the spread of slavery into the new territories. Fillmore's own political fortunes waned in this new environment, as he found himself increasingly marginalized in a changing political scene. Although he attempted a return to public office in 1856 as the candidate for the American Party, his candidacy was met with limited success. The Know Nothing Party, which espoused nativist views and anti-immigrant sentiments, gained some traction, but it failed to become a permanent fixture in American politics. Fillmore's alignment with the Know Nothings further distanced him from mainstream political movements, and his vision of Union preservation and moderation was increasingly out of step with the radical shifts taking place in both the North and the South. The election of 1856 marked a critical moment in the shifting political dynamics of the United States. Democrat James Buchanan won the presidency, but the Republican candidate, John C. Fremont, made significant inroads, securing substantial support in northern states. The Republican Party, with its anti-slavery stance, had firmly established itself as the primary political force in the North, and its growing influence signaled the end of the era of bipartisan political dominance that had characterized the antebellum period. This political realignment was a direct consequence of the growing sectional tensions that Fillmore, with his commitment to compromise, had failed to resolve. By the time of the Civil War, Fillmore's political influence had diminished significantly. His moderate views, which had once been seen as a source of stability, were now viewed as outdated and insufficient to address the deepening crisis of the Union. The Republican Party, now firmly entrenched as the primary Northern party, became the vehicle for the eventual abolition of slavery with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Fillmore, who had been a Whig and a know-nothing, found himself politically isolated as the nation moved toward civil war, with his hopes for preserving the Union through compromise increasingly seen as naive and ineffective. Despite the decline of his political career, Fillmore's post-presidency years were marked by a continued interest in national issues and concerns for the future of the Union. In private, Fillmore expressed deep concern about the direction the country was heading, warning of the destructive potential of the slavery question. His efforts to promote compromise and peace, however, had been eclipsed by the hardening of sectional divisions that would lead to the secession of Southern states and the outbreak of the Civil War. Fillmore's political legacy was thus one of both missed opportunities and tragic foresight, as he presided over a nation that was already unraveling due to the very divisions he had attempted to mitigate. In retrospect, Fillmore's time in office and the years that followed are seen as a pivotal moment in the history of the United States. His presidency, while not marked by great achievements or dramatic reforms, nonetheless came at a time of great national significance. Fillmore was a man caught between two worlds, a pragmatic, unionist approach to governance and a nation increasingly unwilling to compromise on the moral and political issues that would eventually ignite the Civil War. His post-presidency, marked by personal reflection and diminished political influence, underscored the difficulties of attempting to preserve a union that had been rent asunder by the issue of slavery. Fillmore's legacy remains a subject of debate. To some, he was a man of moderation and principle, attempting to navigate the difficult terrain of sectional conflict while safeguarding the Union. To others, his presidency was a missed opportunity to take a stronger stance on the pressing moral issue of slavery. Regardless of perspective, his time in office reflects the profound challenges faced by leaders of his era, who were tasked with governing a nation on the brink of collapse. Part 13: The Civil War Era and Fillmore's Waning Influence. As the United States plunged into the Civil War, Millard Fillmore found himself increasingly sidelined from national politics. The sectional conflict that he had sought to manage during his presidency erupted into full-scale war in 1861, highlighting the ultimate failure of compromise as a long-term solution. While Fillmore had left the presidency nearly a decade earlier, his perspectives and actions during the war era provide a fascinating window into his views on the Union, leadership, and national identity. Fillmore's stance during the Civil War was one of cautious loyalty to the Union. While he condemned secession and supported efforts to preserve the United States, he was also critical of some of Abraham Lincoln's policies, particularly those he viewed as overreaches of executive power. For Fillmore, preserving the Union was paramount, but he believed it should be done with respect for constitutional principles and without infringing on individual liberties. This cautious approach, however, placed him at odds with the more radical measures being implemented by Lincoln and his administration. One of the most divisive issues for Fillmore was the Emancipation Proclamation. While many Northerners hailed it as a moral and strategic turning point in the war, Fillmore saw it as a departure from the war's original goal of restoring the Union. His reluctance to embrace emancipation reflects his belief that the war should focus solely on reunification, rather than addressing the broader issue of slavery. This position, while consistent with his earlier policies, alienated Fillmore from the increasingly abolitionist North and further diminished his relevance on the national stage. Despite his criticisms, Fillmore supported practical measures to aid the war effort. He helped organize local initiatives in Buffalo to provide supplies and resources for Union soldiers, reflecting his enduring commitment to civic duty. Fillmore also served as a public speaker at events to rally support for the Union cause, though his measured tone and focus on constitutional principles often clashed with the fervent rhetoric of the time. His actions during the war illustrate the complexities of his position. Deeply loyal to the Union, yet unwilling to fully embrace the transformative policies that the conflict necessitated. Fillmore's nuanced stance on the Civil War mirrored the broader challenges faced by moderates during this era. As the conflict dragged on and the stakes grew higher, the political center that Fillmore had once represented seemed increasingly irrelevant. The war was no longer just about preserving the Union. It had become a fight over the very nature of American freedom and equality. In this new political and moral landscape, Fillmore's cautious moderation offered little appeal to a nation grappling with existential questions. In his personal life, the Civil War years were a time of reflection and retreat for Fillmore. Though no longer active in national politics, he continued to play a prominent role in Buffalo, supporting local charities, cultural organizations, and educational institutions. His work in these areas during the war underscores his belief in building strong communities as a foundation for national unity. Yet, even in his hometown, Fillmore's views on the war and emancipation were not without controversy. The changing political climate often left him at odds with many of his peers, who had embraced the Union's more radical policies. By the time the war ended in 1865, Fillmore's political legacy was largely overshadowed by the seismic changes reshaping the country. The abolition of slavery, the expansion of federal power, and the rise of new political ideologies marked a clear departure from the compromises and constitutional conservatism that Fillmore had championed. His vision for the Union, one rooted in balance, moderation, and mutual concession, was ultimately eclipsed by the realities of war and the demands of a nation moving toward Reconstruction. Though his influence had waned, Fillmore remained steadfast in his belief that the principles of the Constitution should guide the country's path forward. In his later speeches and writings, he continued to warn against extremism and urged Americans to seek common ground. However, the post-war era had little room for his brand of cautious pragmatism, as the nation grappled with the challenges of rebuilding and redefining itself. Fillmore's views on the Civil War reflect the struggles of a leader whose principles were rooted in an earlier era. While he was committed to preserving the Union, his inability to adapt to the transformative demands of the time highlights the limitations of his approach. As the nation moved forward, Fillmore's legacy remained a reminder of the complexities and compromises that had defined the years leading up to the war. His contributions during the Civil War, though quieter and more localized than those of his contemporaries, nonetheless reveal his enduring dedication to service and his belief in the importance of unity. Part 14. Fillmore's role in civic leadership and legacy in Buffalo. After leaving the presidency, Millard Fillmore devoted much of his life to civic leadership in his hometown of Buffalo, New York. His post-presidential years, though politically quieter, were marked by significant contributions to his local community. Fillmore's efforts in Buffalo underscored his belief in the power of education, infrastructure, and civic institutions to shape a thriving society. Through his work in public service and philanthropy, Fillmore left an enduring legacy that continues to influence Buffalo to this day. Fillmore was instrumental in the growth and development of cultural and educational institutions in Buffalo. Among his most notable achievements was his long-standing association with the Buffalo Historical Society, an organization dedicated to preserving the region's history. Fillmore served as the society's first president, and under his leadership, the group worked to collect and document important artifacts and records that reflected the rich history of Western New York. His dedication to historical preservation reflected his broader commitment to safeguarding knowledge and promoting an informed citizenry. In addition to his contributions to historical preservation, Fillmore played a central role in the development of Buffalo's educational institutions. His most prominent legacy in this regard is the University at Buffalo, which he helped found in 1846. Fillmore continued to support the university in his later years, serving as its chancellor from 1846 until his death in 1874. He worked tirelessly to secure funding for the university, attract talented faculty, and expand its academic offerings. His vision for the University at Buffalo was rooted in the belief that education was essential for individual empowerment and community progress. Fillmore's contributions extended beyond education and history into the realm of healthcare and social welfare. He was actively involved in the establishment of Buffalo General Hospital, a facility designed to provide medical care to residents of the city regardless of their economic status. His advocacy for public health initiatives demonstrated his commitment to addressing the needs of the broader community and ensuring that essential services were accessible to all. This focus on healthcare was particularly significant in a time when public health systems were still in their infancy, and Fillmore's efforts helped lay the groundwork for future advancements in the field. Despite his active civic engagement, Fillmore's post-presidential years were not without controversy. His association with the Know-Nothing Party during the 1856 election alienated some of his contemporaries, particularly in Buffalo, where the immigrant population played a significant role in the city's growth. Nevertheless, Fillmore remained a respected figure within certain circles, admired for his commitment to local development and his tireless work on behalf of Buffalo's institutions. His ability to compartmentalize his national political legacy from his local contributions allowed him to remain a pivotal figure in the community. Fillmore's involvement in Buffalo's civic life also extended to urban planning and infrastructure. He was a strong proponent of improving the city's infrastructure, advocating for projects that would modernize transportation and support economic growth. This included his support for the expansion of the Erie Canal, a vital artery for commerce that had played a central role in Buffalo's rise as a regional economic hub. Fillmore understood the importance of maintaining and improving such infrastructure to ensure the city's continued prosperity. Fillmore's later years were marked by a quiet dignity and a focus on the causes he cared about most. Though his national political career was over, he embraced his role as a local leader, using his influence to support initiatives that benefited Buffalo's residents. His dedication to education, healthcare, and cultural preservation reflected his belief in the importance of strong institutions as the foundation of a healthy and prosperous society. When Fillmore passed away in 1874, he left behind a legacy in Buffalo that was as much about his vision for the city's future as it was about the tangible institutions he helped create. The University at Buffalo, Buffalo General Hospital, and the Buffalo Historical Society all stand as testaments to his belief in the power of community building and the importance of investing in the public good. His work in these areas continues to benefit Buffalo's residents and serves as a reminder of his enduring impact on the city. Fillmore's civic leadership offers a different perspective on his legacy, one that highlights his contributions beyond the presidency. While his national political career remains the subject of debate, his efforts in Buffalo demonstrate a lifelong commitment to service and an unwavering belief in the potential of education, healthcare, and infrastructure to transform communities. His story in Buffalo is a testament to the idea that even after leaving the highest office, a leader can continue to make a meaningful difference on a local level. Part 15: Reflections on Fillmore's Legacy. Millard Fillmore's legacy as the 13th President of the United States and a lifelong public servant remains a topic of debate, nuance, and rediscovery. His presidency, often overshadowed by the crises of his era, was defined by the Compromise of 1850, which sought to bridge the growing divide between North and South. Though controversial, it was an earnest attempt to preserve the Union at a time when tensions over slavery threatened to tear the nation apart. Fillmore's actions, especially his enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act, have drawn criticism for their moral and political consequences, but they also highlight the immense challenges he faced during a tumultuous period. Beyond his presidency, Fillmore's life reflected a steadfast dedication to service, education, and community. His work in Buffalo, where he contributed to the establishment of institutions like the University at Buffalo and Buffalo General Hospital, underscores his belief in building a strong civic foundation. These contributions have left a tangible and enduring impact, offering a more favorable view of a man whose national political legacy is often seen as divisive. Fillmore's role in shaping the political landscape of his time cannot be separated from the broader currents of history. He served at a moment when the United States was on the brink of transformation, grappling with questions of identity, morality, and survival. His attempts at compromise, while pragmatic in intent, ultimately failed to provide lasting solutions to the deeply entrenched issues of slavery and sectionalism. The Civil War, which erupted less than a decade after his presidency, rendered his efforts obsolete and placed him among the last leaders of an era that sought unity through concession rather than confrontation. Nevertheless, Fillmore's career and character reflect the complexity of leadership in a deeply divided society. He was a self-made man, rising from humble beginnings to the highest office in the land, and his life embodied the values of hard work, education, and perseverance. His journey from a struggling farmer's son to a lawyer, congressman, vice president, and ultimately president is a testament to the opportunities offered by the American system. Yet, his time in office and his later years also reveal the limitations of moderation in an era of radical change. Fillmore's post-presidential alignment with the Know-Nothing Party remains a controversial aspect of his legacy. While some viewed his association with nativism as a departure from his earlier ideals, others argue that it reflected his discomfort with the rapid social changes occurring in the mid-19th century. This phase of his life demonstrates the challenges faced by leaders who find themselves out of step with the evolving political and cultural landscape. Despite this, Fillmore's contributions to education, healthcare, and civic life in Buffalo have helped to preserve a more positive aspect of his reputation. In historical rankings of U.S. presidents, Fillmore is often placed near the bottom, largely due to the controversies of his presidency and his perceived inability to rise above the sectional conflicts of his time. However, these rankings often overlook the broader context of his life and the lasting impact of his work outside the political arena. His efforts to improve Buffalo and his advocacy for education and public health reveal a leader who cared deeply about the well-being of his community and sought to leave a lasting mark on the institutions he supported. Fillmore's legacy offers a valuable lesson about the complexities of leadership in times of division. His presidency serves as a reminder of the challenges faced by those who seek compromise in an era of polarization, while his post-presidential contributions demonstrate the importance of civic engagement and community building. Though history has often judged him harshly, a closer examination reveals a man who was both a product of his time and an individual striving to shape the future. In reflecting on Fillmore's life, it becomes clear that his legacy cannot be reduced to a single narrative. He was a man of contradictions, pragmatic yet controversial, ambitious yet humble, and committed to both preserving the Union and serving his local community. His story is a reminder that leadership is rarely simple or universally celebrated, and that the true measure of a leader often lies in their enduring contributions to the lives of those they served. As history continues to reassess the figures of the past, Fillmore's story offers an opportunity to explore the challenges of leadership, the limits of compromise, and the enduring value of service. His life, though marked by controversy, remains a testament to the complexities of a nation grappling with its identity and its future. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.